Men, get ready for an unforgettable weekend. It's Real Men Rally coming to the Palace of Praise April 25th and 26th. Fathers, bring your sons 13 years and up and experience the ultimate father-son weekend. Featuring 12 men's-sized competitions with new competitions this year for fathers and sons to compete. Friday night, the doors open at 5 p.m. and service begins at 6 p.m. featuring dynamic anointed worship with the Palace of Praise worship team. Then get ready for a powerful word delivered by House of Praise Church of God pastor Russell Dodson.
I was lame for 38 years, but look at me now. I can walk. I ran into Jesus. I was deaf, but now I can hear everything, Saul.
Make sure to come back Saturday morning at 8 a.m. and join us for breakfast, followed by the Manpower session at 9 a.m. featuring Pastor Randy West, Anthony Cronut, and Pastor Josh Reasons. If you own a classic car, make sure and join us at 9 a.m. for the Classic Car Cruise-In. After the morning session, stick around and show us what you're made of. Competitions begin at 10:30. It's the ultimate man's weekend with food, fun, fellowship, and door prizes with the ultimate grand prize, a Pit Boss, Palace Smoker and Grill. Real Men Rally is April 25th and 26th at the Palace of Praise. Tickets are just $20 in advance or $25 at the door. Get yours online today at realmenrally.com or in the church foyer. For more information, contact us at the church office at 573-785-4232 or more information is at realmenrally.com. It's gonna be epic. Don't miss it.
Hilton brings you new ways to stay, with experiences that let you capture the glory days. Introducing the Graduate Hotels. Each inspired by local college towns, these stays are always original and never boring. Get in touch with traditions all across the country and enjoy a stay that's a class above the rest. Book at Graduate Hotels with Hilton Honors Points at Hilton.com. It's a win-win. Hilton, for the stay.
He had leukemia. And went through leukemia treatments, and unfortunately, we lost him right before his 14th birthday to the leukemia. So that was tough to watch. But that experience, because I think all these different losses that I've experienced, they've all taught me something different. And that is the experience that taught me how to pray.
Right.
And the thing that I took away from that situation was to stop praying for things that I wanted. Stop trying to control situations. Stop telling God what I wanted to happen. And just pray for patience and understanding while God's will was carried out in whatever situation that I might be
in. Welcome to Real Men Talk, discussing the tough issues facing men and their families every day. Here's Anthony Cronut and Carla Sau.
What's up, guys? Welcome to Real Men Talk. Today, I've got a very special guest for you all the way from Danville, Virginia, Charlie Shealy. He's a fireman. I cannot wait for you guys to hear his story. I cannot wait for you guys to hear his testimony. And so without further ado, what's up, Charlie? How are you today?
Hey, good morning, Anthony. I'm doing well. It's quite the pleasure to be on here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's crazy because we just met, and the guy we had on last week, Jeremy, introduced us, and the moment he began to start telling me about you, I was like, man, I've got to have this guy on my podcast, and so I'm excited. I'm excited for the guys to hear your story, and all that good stuff. And so let's just kind of dive right into that. I tell everybody that's my favorite question is tell me your story. And so I've not heard any of yours, so all this is fresh for me too. And so tell us your story.
Yeah, so I'll kind of start with where I am now, and then we'll catch up to this point. So I'm 39 years old. I've been married for almost 16 years now to my wife Ashley. One of the biggest blessings in my life by a long shot. Have two daughters. One's 14, one's 12. They both play softball. The youngest one also plays travel volleyball. So that takes up the majority of our time, but I wouldn't have that any other way. That's another huge blessing. So I was born here in Danville. was raised here. I lived in a smaller community right outside of the city. We consider it the city here. It's only about 40,000 people. So for a lot of folks, that's not very big, but I live even on the outskirts of that. So in a pretty rural town. And, had what I would describe as a pretty normal childhood. Lived at home with both parents. They were great. They both worked full time. My dad sold cars for a while. And then, with my sister and myself, I have one younger sister. When we got older, he took a job at a bank to have more time at home. So he went from selling cars to financing cars. And it was a significant pay cut for him, but that's one of the first memories that I have of watching what it means to sacrifice as a father and a husband. We're gonna give up this income because I'm missing out on watching my kids grow up and doing all the things that the kids are doing. So I got to see my dad do that at a young age, and that stuck with me for a while. Because the thing that my sister and I always say is that we never saw a difference in our life and our lifestyle, even though we knew that the family's financial situation had changed. So I give my parents a ton of credit for that they still maintained everything we needed, everything we wanted to do as children, and it came from sacrifices that they made that we didn't even see when we were growing up. Came up playing sports, hunting, fishing, staying outside as much as I could, typical boy stuff. I thought at an early age, my mom gave me a book that I filled out in kindergarten, said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" And I had written on there, "I want to be a fireman." And at the time, I figure that's pretty normal for a young boy growing up. You see flashing lights and big red trucks that go real fast down the road. That sounds cool to anybody. I mean, it still sounds cool to me today. So I said when I was in kindergarten, that's what I wanted to do. And then it kind of became lost for a while. And as I grew up, high school was one of my favorite times of my life. I'd go back and relive high school over and over again if I could. Unfortunately, they're kind of my glory days. But I was a very mediocre baseball player, but I absolutely love the game. I'm still attached to that with softball with my girls. And that kind of carried me through high school. And after high school, I did what I thought all young men were supposed to do. And I knew it was either college or the military, and I chose college. And I didn't do very well in college. And that was the first instance that I had of learning what it's like to just fail miserably, fall flat on your face. And went to Virginia Tech right out of high school, and I was a good high school student. High school was relatively easy for me, and that kind of set me up for failure. I didn't know how to struggle. I didn't know how to have the proper amount of responsibility for myself when I went off to a big college where I was kind of lost in the mix and didn't really know how to handle that. And, my academics suffered. My social life went in a direction that definitely wasn't productive. You get in those environments and you're around a lot of new people from different walks of life, and they have influences over you. And I'm not going to pretend like I was the perfect Christian or the perfect person. But I was most definitely learning a lot of lessons during that stretch when I was failing that I didn't realize for quite some time. But
yeah.
Looking back retrospectively, that's a very valuable time in my life of learning what it was like to try something that I just wasn't good at, and to understand that a lot of that falls on me, that I didn't do the things that I needed to do and I wasn't prepared. And that's not something that I can blame on anybody else. I can throw all the shots that I want at the system, but the truth of the matter is I just didn't do what I needed to do. So in 2005, I got the nice, "Hey, we don't think this is a right fit for you" letter from the college. So I came on back home, and that's the point where I was like, I got to figure out what I'm going to do. And I had a very benign experience, something very simple that happened in college, where I had a friend who had a dead battery in a vehicle, to the point to where it couldn't be jumped, and she needed the battery changed. Well, she had never done anything like that for herself. I took her to the auto parts store, got a battery, put it in for her. And that simple act opened my eyes to, I may be able to do things for other people that they can't do for themselves. And that brings me great joy. I got a sense of joy from something so simple and that was like a month before I left college. And I was like, I need to do something to where I can serve others. I can fill a void in others' lives that they can't feel themselves.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, maybe I'll come back home, take some automotive classes, do something where I can help people provide a service. And when I came home, and really kind of before that, I had some friends that were in the local volunteer fire department, and I would ask them about their experiences and what they liked and, what it was all about. And kind of playing on that 5-year-old kid from kindergarten, still in the back of my mind, it opened my eyes that it might actually be a possibility for me to do something like this for a living.
Mm-hmm.
So I joined the local fire department in 2005, volunteered there. And it took no time for me to be 100% certain that the events and the failures in my life leading up to that point was putting me in a place where I needed to be.
Right.
I remember having a conversation with a good friend of mine who was the local fire chief here. And I was like, man, I got to figure out how to do this for a living. Like this feels right. This feels like exactly where I'm supposed to be. So I got to figure this out. And, back in 2005, getting a job on a fire department was pretty competitive. So
right.
You just start blasting out applications everywhere you can throw anywhere that's looking to hire, you throw your name in the hat and you're looking at, several hundred applications for, 10 spots or so. And I was pretty fortunate that I think it was the third application that I put in. I was hired in a city about 60 miles north of where I live. It's a little bigger city. It's about 85,000 people with a very large evangelical university there that's pretty widely known.
Yeah.
And they hired me in 2007, went through rookie school, and I've been there ever since. So now I'm a battalion chief on C shift. I'm in charge of half the city for our shift. I have 4 stations under me, supervise 5 captains. And, at 39 years old, I have heard, several times that I elevated relatively quickly. I don't feel that way. I feel like, I only stepped into roles because I felt like there was a need. It was never because I had this desire to have any sort of responsibility or, it wasn't about the financial aspect of it. It was about, do I have the ability to fill this need or not?
Right.
And when those opportunities came up, a lot of prayer, a lot of talking with my wife, and decided at those intervals in my career, when promotion opportunities came around, that it felt right at the time. So I've done that, and I'm at a point now to where I definitely miss the manual labor of not being a chief officer, but I also have a very rewarding position to where I get to see the value in investing in people. I'm now seeing guys come through that were born about the time I was getting in the fire service, and that's a big slap in the face. As you mature and you grow. Yeah, man. Because I was that kid because I got in at 21 years old, and I'm working with guys that have been there, since the early 70s. And they called me the kid, along with, the other guys I was hired with. And now that role's reversed. And I'm trying to provide the same value for these younger kids that those guys gave to me, because without them, my career is nothing, without the mentors and the people that really fed me and took a significant interest in me, not just professionally, but personally, growing as a man and a husband and a father. Like I've learned as much about how to be a good father and a good husband in the fire station as I have how to be a good fireman.
Right.
So that's been tremendously valuable to my growth and personal experience. And of course there's a lot of things along the way, that weren't so great, that have kind of, they're all pieces of the puzzle that make up who I am today.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of that, I've experienced what for me, I feel like is a pretty decent amount of loss in my life. One of the more shaping experiences that I had when I was 16 years old, I talk about high school very fondly. It was a great experience, but at 16, I lost one of my closest friends to a firearms accident. And, when you lose someone at 16, that's when things start to become real, that life is finite, and we don't have any understanding as to what our future may hold, because we've got all the grandest plans in the world. We like to plan for things. We like to think about our future, but we really don't know. And we really have very little control over what is coming for us in the future, because someone much more intelligent than us has our plan already laid out. And we just don't know what that's going to be. So at 16, losing a close friend like that, it taught me the value of relationships. It taught me a lot of things, how to value the friends that you have while they're here, and not to be afraid to tell people how you feel about them.
Yeah.
While they're here, don't wait to eulogize somebody. Look them square in the eye right now and tell them you love them,
Right.
because that means so much more than anything you could ever say after they're gone. And as I progressed through high school and into college, I've dealt with some more typical loss. I lost my grandmother when I was a freshman in college, which was not out of the ordinary. She was up in age and she died of natural causes. It wasn't anything tragic involved with that. Then as I got into the job, that's when things really started to kind of roll. In 2011, my oldest daughter had just been born, and I had a 13-year-old cousin. He was my first cousin. He had been more like a nephew or a little brother growing up, because we were kind of closer in age. We were only 12 years apart, and he had leukemia. And went through leukemia treatments, and unfortunately we lost him right before his 14th birthday to the leukemia. So that was tough to watch, but that experience, because I think all these these different losses that I've experienced, they've all taught me something different, and that is the experience that taught me how to pray.
Right.
And the thing that I took away from that situation was to stop praying for things that I wanted. Stop trying to control situations. Stop telling God what I wanted to happen, and just pray for patience and understanding while God's will was carried out in whatever situation that I might be in. And until that point in my life, I did not understand that at all. I had been taught those things, that if you truly want to give God a situation and give him the control that he already has, then you've got to stop praying for things to go the way that you think they're supposed to go, because we don't have it figured out. We don't have the ability to know what the right thing in each situation is.
That's right.
So watching what happened with Joe, that's when I really learned. It's like, you don't know what's best for Joe. Like, you don't,
Right.
you may think that the best thing is for, the doctors to find the magic pill that makes all this go away, but God may need something else.
Yeah.
And you need to stop telling him what you want to happen, and that's really hard to separate your humanistic desires from
Yes, it is.
God's plan and say, look, I'm not the one that's able to set the course here. I just pray for patience, pray for understanding, pray for wisdom, and pray for opportunities for you to make a difference, no matter what they may be. And then capitalize on those opportunities when you have them. So that was a very a very big turning point in my life when it comes, especially my prayer life. Because man, I fell in that trap a lot. You'd lay down at night and you say, well, hey God, here's my checklist today.
Right.
Here's all the things that I want you to do for me. Here's all the things that I think are going to be better for me or for a person that you're praying for. And it's like, man, like I'm not the person that needs to make these decisions. I need to relinquish that control a little bit.
100%.
Yeah. And then, of course, moving on from there, the traumatic experiences with the job are just, they're too numerous to count at this point. A lot of them have gotten lost over the years in my brain. The ones that I processed in a healthy manner are stored away in my brain where they're supposed to be. I also know that there are still some experiences that are hung in places that they're not supposed to be.
Right.
So, that was, and I typically, when I talk about my experiences with the job, I don't highlight those individual experiences because they are just pieces of the puzzle that create the whole experience.
That's right. Yes.
So they, from the minute I got in, there were things that were happening on a daily basis that were adding to the traumatic experiences that just are the come along with the job. And it's funny because it's not always what folks that don't do the job think that contribute to your deterioration in your mental health. It's not always the headline calls. It's not the ones that are in the newspaper. Yes, those are sometimes they're bad and they're difficult to process and deal with. But there's a lot of things that we see, people living in conditions that you wouldn't imagine, because we get invited into people's homes every day, to fix whatever problem they may be having, and
Right.
to see some children that are living in certain conditions, whether it be the physical conditions or just the complete lack of family system that they may have. You get to see a lot in a lot of people's lives, and that also has a compounding effect, because you begin to, I've heard you talk on some of your previous podcasts about carrying these burdens, and you are 100% correct, because some of these children that you see that aren't being loved the way that God intended for them to be loved, that's a tough one, because you want to take these children under your wing and make a difference for them, but you just don't have that opportunity.
Right.
We don't get to be invested in the long term like that. We interact with these folks for a very short amount of time, and then poof, we're gone. We fix their acute problem, and then we move on. So you have this Rolodex of people that you've met along the way that you wish you could go back and do something for, but you just can't. And that becomes its own burden.
That is a struggle. So I was a children's pastor for 9 years, which is the reason why I never become, like a police officer or anything. Cause I don't think that I could, right. I don't know that I could show up to some of the homes that I have been in. We live in a smaller community, also, I don't know, probably 20,000 people or so here in Poplar Bluff, but, coming into some of their homes and coming into some of their places, being a children's pastor, praying for families. And, that is probably one of the most difficult things I've ever had to process, leaving a situation, knowing, what kind of state that they're in, their parents are in, their homes are in, and then having to leave, knowing that when I leave, that I don't even know if that child's going to get fed, right? I don't even know,
Right.
Those types of things. And I just, that is an absolute struggle, and it absolutely can cause trauma in your lives, yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so many situations that you get exposed to that you can't do anything about, and that, and that becomes pretty difficult. But it's you learn how to deal with that, and you learn after years of experience how to insert yourself in certain things, how to stay separated so you don't start to carry those burdens around, but yet understanding that sometimes it's something very small that you can do or say for somebody that makes a ton of difference. In the role that I'm in now, when we respond to, more serious calls, or, if someone's in cardiac arrest, and, my crews are taking great care of the patient. So it's my role to interact with the family. And that has opened up a tremendous opportunity for me to make a big difference for people. And I don't always get to know whether the things that I said mattered or not, but I always try to take advantage of those opportunities, to try to help them process probably one of the most traumatic experiences that they will have. If I can say something during that experience that changes that, then I've done what I'm supposed to do, and I can rest pretty easy on that.
Yeah.
So, kind of being in this position I'm in now, that's helped me with these burdens I've been carrying around, because it's opened an opportunity to make a tangible difference, I feel like.
Yeah. That's good.
And then, jumping back in, picking up with, when we lost my cousin Joe, I still had both my parents. My oldest daughter was already born. I didn't have my youngest daughter yet. And that's when I started to learn a little bit about my past and my family. So I never knew either of my grandfathers. My dad's dad passed away before I was born. My mother's father passed away when I was 2 months old. So I never got to know them. I knew my grandmothers and had good relationships with them. But I started to learn about my maternal grandfather through some of the struggles that I started to see my mom have. And so after we lost Joe, that was my mom's brother's youngest son. So there was a strong connection between her and him. And this kid, man, he had a personality that would light up a room. And he was not a video game kid by any stretch of the imagination. He came along before every kid had a phone in their hand at 10 years old. And he just liked to play and do. And he was one of the funniest kids I've ever known. He really was a captivating child. So, not that that's the qualifier that makes it tough to lose him, but it definitely added to the experience. And
100%,
and what I saw was my mom struggled with that loss tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was, she was, I consider her an angel on this earth, but she was an example of the fact that we're all fallible, because after we lost Joe, she developed some very unhealthy coping mechanisms to deal with that, most notably alcohol. And it's not something that I discuss often because of the connotations that come along with, finding out that somebody has become an alcoholic. Comes with so many negative connotations with it. The people that haven't dealt with that before will say, well, it's weakness. It's all these things that is the fault of the individual. And I don't disagree with those things necessarily. But I've also been close enough to watch somebody that I love become addicted that it's changed my outlook on what addiction is, what it means physically, mentally. And that process with my mom went on until 2018. And in 2018, she passed away secondary to the alcoholism. And that, that's a huge moment in a man's life when they lose their mother. Because I had been her advocate. I had helped her out getting into rehab centers. I had helped get her into counseling. And I watched a woman who was truly one of the most selfless and kindest people that I had ever interacted with fall victim to the grip of this chemical that she had to have to function.
Yeah.
And just become a completely different person. And it was hard to finally get to the point to where you have to look your mom in the eye and say, look, I'm not going to allow your granddaughters to be around you anymore if you can't get a hold of this. And for her to still not be able to break that addiction, that was tough. You don't ever want to have to give an ultimatum to a family member, but sometimes that's the only choice you have. And we had gotten to that point not long before her death, to where I was in it. I had told her, I was like, I will crawl through the mud with you. I will do anything I can do to get you the help that I know you want. And she wanted it. And she wanted to get better. She wanted nothing more than to rid her life of the addiction that she had developed. But she had gotten just beyond the point to where anything was helping. Anything that I knew how to do, anything that the professionals knew how to do, through medical detoxes, counseling, inpatient rehab, and all that. It just, none of it worked. And kind of as a side note, that definitely changed my mindset on some of the patients that I would interact with at my job, because I'll be honest, I kind of fell into that negative mindset over people who struggle with addiction, saying, oh, this is such a personal problem. Why do we continue to, respond to these same people over and over and over again? And we always help them. We're always, bailing them out when they lose control. And that was my mindset before. And then when you watch your mom go through something, you're like, wait a minute, like this is somebody's son. This is somebody's brother, somebody's father, whatever the situation may be. And they were created by the same God that created me. Mm-hmm. And I know, because the Bible tells me that God loves them as much as he loves me, why would I categorize that person as someone who's less worthy of the help that I'm able to provide than anybody else?
Right.
I didn't have to earn my salvation. God gifted that to me through the death of his son, Jesus Christ, on the cross. And if he did that for me, why would I ever hold something against someone else who was created by the same God? Mm-hmm. We're all worthy of love. We're all worthy of forgiveness, because, man, God has to forgive me every day. Every single day I do something or say things or have thoughts that I know aren't godly. So if I'm not any more special than an addict on the street, I get forgiveness and I get love, and they deserve the same thing.
Amen.
So that was very impactful. And though the situation was probably the toughest one I've ever dealt with, and still is, I'm grateful that I was able to glean some wisdom out of that situation, because going back to what I talked about going through Joe's situation, I prayed for wisdom, understanding, and patience then. And that helped me learn how to pray when my mom was going through those things. Obviously, I prayed for her to get better, because it was hard not to, and yes, that was my desire, and I knew it was her desire. And, but I also prayed for wisdom. And I think what came out of that situation was an ability to have a better understanding of, human nature. Mm-hmm. And I have taken that experience and not just for myself, been able to influence others' thought processes along the way, because, I see some of our younger guys that have the same thought process that I did when I was younger. Like,
right.
Why do we need to keep helping people that can't help themselves? And I was like, well, that's why we exist. We exist to fill a role that people, and whether it's personal choices or environmental factors that put them in that situation, does not matter. It does not matter at all. That has no bearing on whether they deserve our help or not. And that was extremely beneficial when I changed that thought process personally. And, I've been able to pass that along to quite a few guys as well.
That's good. I tell you what, that's such an eye-opening, a surreal moment when you come to this place where you recognize people in their their wounded state, right? You see people not in their addiction, not in their they're crying out for help, but you see them as wounded human beings, right? Something that I talk about often is none of us get out of here unscathed, right? None of us are going to make it out without being wounded, right? We're all imperfect people in an imperfect world. And because of that, we all get wounded and we all cause wounds, every one of us.
Right.
No matter how much we try, no matter how much, some people who do not, they don't know how to cope those wounds, right? And it doesn't always start off that way, but a lot of times it does. Okay, so I'm dealing with, I can't tell you how many people I know that have been addicted to pain pills because of the pain that they were in. That's where it all started at, right?
Absolutely.
They didn't choose to be there. They were legitimately trying to get rid of the pain, and as a result of that, the process, you know what I'm saying? And so the same thing goes with, with loss, right? trying to cope with loss, trying to cope with, there have been some people that have seen some horrific things. And, without Jesus in their lives, how else do they process? I remember I was listening to a podcast. I do a lot of apologetic stuff and stuff like that. I was listening to a podcast by Dr. Jeff Myers, and he had this man on there. And I wish I could remember his name. I'd have to go back and look at it, but I can't remember. But he used to be like one of the first transgenders, right? And Lord saved his life and all that stuff. But he talked about the events that led up to that moment, right? The abuse, the sexual abuse, all this stuff. And I thought, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, right? I didn't know, then I started seeing statistics like, people who are 90% of people who identify as homosexual have been sexually abused, and I'm like, oh my goodness. You know what I mean? It just opens your eyes to not only see, them as human beings, but you see them, they're hurting. They're crying out for help. And they need somebody like us to come in their lives and just love them where they're at and try to pour into their lives and show them Jesus, right? Not necessarily accept, right? That's not where we're but to be like, hey, there's hope out there. His name is Jesus. And the same thing rolls over to addiction. I deal with a lot of addiction around in our area. And as a matter of fact, I just spoke at a recovery thing just this past Monday, and seeing them in that same state. These are human beings made in the image of God they're hurt. They've been through horrific things. Most of them have, and they were crying out for help. They didn't know how to cope. They didn't know how to deal with the things that they were going through, which led to an addiction that they didn't really want to be in, but took over their life. Right now, they're in this state. How do we best show them, hey, there's hope outside of this. This is not who you are. This is not your identity, right? We talked about that, about, the first responders. The same thing applies to them. This is not your identity. You are made in the image of God. Let's get you there, right? And
right.
It's a very sobering moment to come to that when you have to check yourself, right? Because I had to do the same thing. Check yourself in and be like, hey, they're not their addiction. They're human beings, right? And so, yeah, that's tough. That's tough. And I can only imagine seeing your mom go through it, right? And
yeah, we're all a sum of our experiences throughout our entire life, right? And I look at her situation, and I think about, she was exposed to a father figure, my grandfather, and this is where I highlighted that I learned more about my grandfather through the way I saw my mom struggle, because he had the same issues. And of course, I wasn't around for my mother's childhood. But from what I know, it wasn't always harmonious. It wasn't always the same type of childhood that I had.
Mm-hmm.
So what I saw was my mom was trying to break this generational cycle of toxic childhoods, and it got to a point to where she went down a path that I think she was probably always afraid of going, but that it just life pushed, she ended up in that direction because of the experiences that she had. She was able to give me a wonderful childhood, but when my sister and myself were grown and were starting our own families, it's kind of like that part of her life was complete, and she became vulnerable to being pushed down this path of addiction. So how fortunate am I that I haven't had the same experiences that have pushed me in that direction, because we're all somewhat fortunate that we could be one event away from being in the same situation that somebody else is in, that you feel like they've put themselves in, and that's not exactly true. They have just experienced things that we haven't experienced, and
Right.
to see them where they are and not be concerned about why they're there, just understand that they have some Rolodex of experience in their life that has caused this thing to happen, and be less concerned about the why and concerned about the right now, and what can we do by building relationships and having those positive experiences with those individuals to where maybe we say or do the thing that changes for them, changes
Right.
their situation, because we don't always know exactly what they need and exactly what can be done. But you have to be available. You have to be willing to strip away the labels and see them, just like you said, as a brother or sister that was created in the image of God, and treat them the same way that we would want to be treated.
Yeah.
And that's a sticking point for a lot of people, unfortunately.
Switch to Verizon Business and get more from your internet without paying more for your internet. Get LTE Business Internet starting at $39 a month when paired with select business mobile plans. That's unlimited data, and with it, unlimited possibilities. Start saving today with Verizon Business, ranked #1 in small business internet customer satisfaction by J.D. Power. Starting price for 25 megabits per second LTE internet plan with smartphone plan savings, plus taxes, fees, and economic adjustment charge. Terms apply. For J.D. Power 2024 award information, visit jdpower.com/awards.
Yeah, man, that's tough. That's tough. Watching your parents go through things, mine, not necessarily addiction, but my, just watching them go through pain, and dealing with just life, right? When you realize that, hey, my parents are not, they're susceptible to sin just like the rest of us are, right? Is that it's kind of a sobering, very sobering thought of, if they can fall down this path, then so can I, right? I'm
Right.
very, very much I very much believe in generational curses, and the thing that I try to teach other men is that it's our job, right, to break those generational curses, those things that my biological father. So I'm adopted by my dad, the man I call dad. My biological father, even to this day, is an alcoholic. He's got 3 kids, all by different women, all by and at times I can feel that generational curse try to creep into my life, right? I can feel it. I have those thoughts, man, it'd be nice to have a beer. It's like, man, I've not had a drink since I'm 42 years old. I've not had a drink since I was 19 years old. Where in the world did that thought even come from? It's that spirit that continues to pour into my, all I am is just one bad day, right? From relying on that instead of relying on the Lord, from being in the same position, right? We're all fallible. We're all broken. We're all right. The only thing that separates us from everybody else is Jesus, right? That's it,
Yep.
And to be in a constant reliance on, my family needs me. As a man, my family needs me to be the best that I can be. My wife needs me to be the best that I can be. My children need me to be the best that I can be. And I can only be the best that I can possibly be when I surrender myself to the Lord and deny myself, right? And that being in that constant state of trying to do that always. I mean, let's be real honest. Sometimes it's exhausting, right? Sometimes it's, good grief. Can we just stop for just a moment, right? Can life just chill out for a moment? Can I let my guard down for a moment, and then, no, I can't. My children are relying on me, right? And so to understand that, hey, we're no different than anybody else. When again, I go back to the only thing that separates us is Jesus. Our reliance upon the Lord keeps us from going down that same path, and that's it. That's it.
You're 100% right. And what I have found is that, the easy way is to keep doing the same things that you've always done.
Right.
The easy way is to say, well, it's in my DNA. Like, I'm just going to be like this. My grandfather was like this. My mother fell into this trap, and this is just going to be the burden that I carry. But man, as a husband and a father, you got to do the hard things.
That's
Like,
right.
you have got to take, because the hard path is usually the right path. And I can tell you that staying vigilant and on top of your mental health and your healthy coping mechanisms, that is hard. But it is the right choice, and it's really the only choice if you're going to do the things that you are charged by the Lord to do as a husband and a father. And that's a theme that's always stayed in my head, was like, if it feels like the easy way to be, then it's usually not going to be the right way. It's not going to be productive, because the easy way for me, was to not talk about my experiences, to not get help, because it's a lot easier just to sit at home and be miserable than it is to go talk to a counselor and get your mind right so you can be the person that you want to be. That's hard, to sit down in a room across from a stranger that, I had never met, and just explode all this trauma onto someone else and project my burdens onto someone else was one of the hardest things I ever did. But it was by far one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done. And one of the most necessary things that I've ever done. But I had to get to a point to where I knew I didn't have any other choice before I made that decision. And, with alcohol, it's because I'm hard-headed, right?
Right.
I'm 100% convinced. Yeah, man, I'm convinced that, my problems are my problems, and they're not to be shared with anyone else. That this is, if this is what God has seen fit to put in my life, then the saying that people like to use all the time: if God sees you to it, He'll see you through it. Well, that's true, but He's going to give you the opportunity to work through it. He's not just going to, God doesn't hop down to earth with a magic wand and say, well, I put all these struggles in front of you, I'm going to tap you on each shoulder and everything's going to be fine. That's not the way this works.
That's right.
He puts people in our life. He gives us resources that we have to put in the effort to take advantage of those things, to get us where God wants us to be and to where we need to be. And for me, that came a couple years ago, where I never considered myself reliant on alcohol, or, but I was a social drinker, up until, I'm a month shy of 2 years since my last drink. And it had just gotten to the point, man. Well, thank you. It had just gotten to the point to where, I never felt reliant, but I definitely knew that the thoughts and the mental unwellness that came along with alcohol was a dangerous road that if I didn't get a hold of that, it was going to get out of control. So I wanted to solve a problem before it became a problem.
Yeah.
And I just knew that it was what was best for me. I try not to project that on others very often, because I sometimes, when you try to influence people about their personal decisions, you come off as the holier than thou, like I've done these things. Why won't you do these things? But it's such a personal decision that people have to make. Is this good for you? Is it enriching your life, or is it not? And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was not making my life better. And if it's not making it better, then it's making it worse. There's no in between. There's no lukewarm experiences in life. It's either productive or it's unproductive. It's either helping you move forward or it's holding you back. And it didn't take, once I applied that thought process to alcohol in general, it was a no brainer for me. Like I'm going to leave this stuff behind. It's not going to get me where I want to be. And if I can stop it before it becomes a problem, then I'm doing the things that I know my mother would want me to do, that if she could rewind time, she would have done for herself.
Right. And that applies to a lot of different things, right? That applies to not only alcohol. I mean, anything that we put in front of the Lord, right?
Right.
I come from a very, rural area also, so hunting, fishing, stuff like that. And I see the same things in that sometimes as I do alcohol, or they will.
Right.
That's their coping mechanism. Instead of going to the Lord, instead of relying on the Lord, it could be anything. And so, yeah, dude, to be able to get a hold of that before it becomes a problem, kudos to you. Because that's not the way that we often work, right? And often we allow those things to become issues, and then we're like, oh, maybe I should get this taken care of. But then it's hard. Then
Right.
it's the struggle's difficult, and and stuff, and so yeah, Charlie. I want to be respectful of your time. We're 48 minutes into this. I want to dig a little bit into. Okay, so the entire podcast is based on helping men become spiritual leaders, right? And so here you are. You're this. I don't want to get it wrong. Are you a fire chief? Is that what your position is?
I'm a battalion chief.
Battalion
I'm
chief.
a couple steps under the fire chief. Yeah.
Gotcha. So a battalion chief. Your husband. You're a father. So I want to discuss how you're able to separate. Your job is so important. Right. I talk about all the time, first responders, our societies are built on the backs of first responders. Without them, society will collapse upon itself. It's chaos. Right. And so how do you continue in the job that you're in, right, and still maintain the identity of a husband, a father, right, and keep those roles at the forefront of what you do? I hope that question makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. The fire service is, obviously it's different, I think, than any other career. We get, compared to law enforcement a lot, and there's tons of similarities and a lot of crossover there. I think sometimes unfairly we get looped in with the military, and not unfair to us, unfair to them. They do something so much more significant and on a much different level than what we do. But, society likes to group first responders and veterans together sometimes. And I think it kind of diminishes what our soldiers and whatnot do. So I want to make sure that I don't loop us in with them. But something that I've always told my wife, because I don't share everything with her about work, and a lot of that's intentional. And I tell her that I feel like if we're called to do this for a living, we're called to do it so other people don't have to be exposed to it.
Right.
And because of that, you almost become part of this society of people that do know what it's like. And they're the only people that understand you. They're the only people that understand your experiences and can relate with not just the things that you see, but, the work schedule. We work 24 hours a day. We work from 7:30 one morning to 7:30 the next morning, then we're off for 48 hours, and then we're back for 24, and it's just a continuous cycle.
Mm-hmm.
We work 56 hours a week versus 40 hours a week, and we all still maintain, most of us have second jobs. I do landscaping on my days off, and because it's so unique, it becomes cemented as part of your identity. And the guys I work with, we joke all the time, like, you can spot a fireman a mile away in public, because it just becomes such a big part of you. You act a certain way, you talk a certain way, and you identify with certain things, and you look at things that the general public doesn't. And we wear that kind of as a badge of honor sometimes, but it comes with a downside that is exactly what you're saying. It's because you become so locked in that you're never able to separate and just be a husband or just be a dad. And that's something that I had to learn over time, because, there were times when my wife had to remind me, when I was a bit younger, when I was a new captain running my own fire station, and some of the things that I would say and do at home, she would just remind me, like, hey, we're not your firemen. Like, don't try to lead your home the way that you lead a fire station,
Mm-hmm.
because it is, you may be able to apply lessons that you've learned there, but don't talk to your kids like they're firemen, like that you're trying to train or that you're trying to mentor. These are your kids that have to be treated differently.
Yes.
And she's good about keeping me in check. She's wonderful with that. She'll just give me that look every now and then, like, you're being a little too fireman-y right now. And even the trip we just took for for spring break, when one of the local fire engines would come by, they catch me staring, because that's what we do. We're watching, trying to figure out what they're doing, where they're going, what their apparatus looks like, how it's designed. And she would, hey, like, snap me out of it and be like, hey, we're on vacation. Like, leave that away.
Yeah.
And one of the things that kind of hit me, reading through the Gospels, so many times when Jesus was walking the earth, he intentionally separated himself from the masses. When Jesus needed a reset, his favorite place to go was on a mountain. And that to me showed, like, even Jesus didn't want to get caught up in his, like, interacting with people and losing his mission on earth. And he knew very well when to separate himself and to go let the world be quiet, to shut the world away, spend time with God, to get redirected back to where he knew he wanted to be. Why don't I apply the same thought process to my job? And when that light switch moment happened, that's when I started to understand that, like, I have got to let this job be a part of my life and not my entire life, because the job's going to go away at some point, but I'm still going to be a husband. I'm still going to be a father, and I can't forego the growth in my marriage and the building of relationships with my children, because I'm so caught up in what's going on at work. And obviously, as you elevate in a department and gain more responsibility, I have 23 people at work that I'm responsible for, that I work for, because that's always been my mindset. They don't work for me, I work for them. I'm there to enrich their job and their experience. It is very easy to get sucked in, constantly looking at work emails when you're not at work, or we always want to know what's going on, if the other shifts are going to something that's significant or whatnot. So you have to be intentional about that separation. And sometimes that means missing out on something at work, but you've got to understand that you can't do everything. You can't be completely committed. You can't serve more than one master.
That's right.
So are you going to rob that time away from your family, your wife, or your kids to give it to the fire service? Or has the fire service already gotten its due? It's time to give them what they deserve. And I think when you just break it down like that, that's when I really started to understand that I have to be intentional about separating myself. I can't be on duty 24/7. Now, there are parts of the job that have caused, different, I don't want to say mental health issues, but you can't deny the fact that the hypervigilance is real, right?
Right.
We're on vacation in Gatlinburg, Tennessee this past week, and walking up the sidewalk with, hundreds of people, I make my wife and my kids walk to the inside. I walk on the outside closest to the street, because what am I thinking about? Hey, there's cars going up and down this street. There are bad people in this world. This is a prime opportunity for somebody to take a vehicle and do something bad with it. And I want to protect them. Why do I sit with my back to the wall in restaurants? Because I want to see the door. I want to see what's going on, because I've experienced things where bad people have done bad things, and I don't want my family to be exposed to that. So those experiences you can't make go away. And that thought process is extremely hard to suppress. But that, to me, isn't necessarily still being tied to the job. That's just part of knowing more about what could potentially happen in society than the general public. And like I said, we do that, and we experience those things, and it's at the forefront of our mind because we deal with it all the time, and that doesn't go away. But you don't have to feel like that's still attaching you to the job. That's just, we're, like I said before, where some of our experiences, and my experience says that bad things can happen.
That's right.
But man, that'll creep in and cause all sorts of problems if you're not careful. I used to be hypersensitive to my wife not returning phone calls and text messages, because specifically when she was at work, I'd text her, call her, just check in, see how her day's going. And if she doesn't reply in whatever my brain decides is the right amount of time, then the thought process turns to something's happened, something's wrong.
Right.
Same thing with, my dad. My dad's, he's 72 years old, or he'll be 72 this December. If I don't get a text message from him by a certain time every day, I'm going to call him and talk to him, because how many people have I seen that something has happened to them and their phones are ringing on the nightstand with their family calling to check on them? Or, we hear the stories of, well, when we didn't hear from them by lunchtime, we knew something was wrong.
Yeah.
And my brain immediately starts to relate a lack of communication with something being wrong. Yeah. So I've had to be very vigilant.
Spring is here, and you can now get almost anything you need for your sunny days delivered with Uber Eats. What do we mean by almost? Well, you can't get a well-groomed lawn delivered, but you can get a chicken parmesan delivered. A cabana? That's a no. But a banana? That's a yes. A nice tan? Sorry, nope. But a box fan? Happily, yes. A day of sunshine? No. A box of fine wines? Yes. Uber Eats can definitely get you that. Get almost anything delivered with Uber Eats. Order now. Alcohol in select markets. Product availability may vary by region. See app for details.
And self-aware that sometimes I create situations because of what I've experienced that are absolutely not true, with no context whatsoever, other than someone that, not returning a phone call. That's not justification to start creating these situations in my head.
Right.
But man, it's tough not to sometimes. So that's one of the downsides of just being so attached to those experiences that you start to apply them to your own life. And in a way that's just not fair to those people.
Yeah. And I think we all do that to an extent, right? We've had something bad happen to us, and, we've been in a car wreck or we've been in whatever. And then all of a sudden somebody's traveling. My wife is bad. We were in a really bad car wreck in 2018, and my oldest children, my oldest is, he goes to college in Springfield. It's about 3 hours away or so. And he's driving back and forth, and stuff, sometimes on the weekends and stuff. And my wife, she's the same way. If she doesn't get that text message or that phone call or whatever, hey, I'm at the gas station, filling up or whatever it is, she instantly, we could do that because, our worldviews, like you said, are some of everything that's happened to us. And we're so bad, especially us as men, right? Because we like to control everything anyways, right? We want to control every aspect of everything. And when there are things that we cannot control, we automatically create scenarios that are sometimes just catastrophic, right? In our mind, like the world is coming to an end. It's like, wait a minute, their ringer was off, and stuff. We could do that. To be self-aware of it, to be like, hey, Anthony, this is not, it's chill out, get some more information before you freak out, whatever. But we absolutely can fall prey to those types of things, in every aspect. And I can only imagine that how much worse it is seeing it often, right? In the position that you're in, And so let me ask you this as we move on. I want to talk about how you process trauma. All right. So obviously yours is going to be a little bit different. As men, every one of us has experienced trauma in some form or fashion in our lives. None of us, like I was saying earlier, none of us get out of here unscathed. We all create wounds. We all get wounded. And in your position, right, as a first responder, your very occupation creates wounds, right? Creates trauma. And I want to talk a little bit about how you process that, being a Christian man, right? Being a family man, how you process that trauma healthy and able to keep that separated from, this is not who I am, right? My trauma is not who I am. I deal with guys all the time that they don't ever get over it, right? They spend a lifetime of falling prey to, hey, this happened to me in my life, and that's all that that's it becomes their entire identity, right? We're talking about people 50, 60, 70 years old I've even dealt with that, that's who they are. Their trauma is who they are. So how do you process your trauma in a healthy manner? And then we'll land this plane.
So I one of the most difficult things that I've ever done. So in 2023, I was on a trip to the beach in the Outer Banks with my family, and it as far as the trip goes, it was great. I'm at one of my favorite places with my favorite people, and man, I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable because I had gotten so inundated with trauma, and it wasn't necessarily the specific events at that point, but it was kind of just the body of work I had experienced over time that had put me in a place to where I knew that I was not the husband nor the father that I wanted to be at all. Mm-hmm. And standing, it's a little overlook at the hotel that we stay at in the Outer Banks, looking out on one of the most beautiful parts of God's creation, I think, and being completely unhappy with where I was at and miserable. That was my aha moment. And when I had to accept the fact that I was no longer able to healthily process what I was experiencing and that I needed help from somebody else, was one of the most difficult realizations that I had ever come to. Because part of being a fireman is like, we're problem solvers, and now I'm in a situation to where I can't solve my own problem. So right. What am I doing wrong to where I can no longer be who I want to be and do the job that I want to do and stay mentally healthy through all that? Where have I failed in all of this to where I'm basically to the point where I'm going to cry out for help? And I made that cry out for help right then and there. So standing at the hotel, we have a counseling service that's provided for us through our job. They're called Impact First Responders. And there's one lady that I want to mention. Her name's Kristen Sherritt, and I credit her with saving my life. And what I mean by that, I was fortunate, with the mental health struggles that I had had never gotten to the point to where I had ever considered any sort of self-harm or anything like that. I was very fortunate that I had not developed those thoughts or desires, but I knew that I was not anything what I wanted to be. So I called Kristen. She's the director of Impact First Responders. It's a subset of Impact Living Counseling Services. And I said, look, I need help. I don't know what I need, but I need help. And I know that you're here to provide this service. So I've got to do something. She immediately set me up with counseling. And through that process, I was able to sit down with a counselor and determine that, in her opinion, I had developed PTSD from, lifelong experiences, no one particular event, and as I started going through that process, I learned that I was the one harming myself. The trauma was going to happen. But because of my propensity to say, well, if I don't handle this myself, if I'm not tough enough to do this, then why did I choose to do this job? If I can't mentally handle this, then I'm failing as a man. When I learned to leave that mindset behind and be vulnerable and say, I can't do this anymore, that's when my life changed forever. And that's why I say that Kristen saved my life. She didn't save my physical life, but she saved my quality of life by opening these doors for me. So what I've learned through that process, I've had several experiences that I haven't even brought up yet. Not long after I get promoted to Battalion Chief, within months, one of my closest friends in the department that I had gone through rookie school with, he's in his late 40s, and I go by his fire station. I meet with him, and his crew. We hang out for a bit. I give him my old give him a good old hug before I leave, and I get a phone call an hour later. He's had a stroke at the table. And for a stretch, we didn't know if he was going to live or die. And going through that process with him, and his wife, having a relationship already with him and knowing his wife personally and his family and his kids. I know his kids' names. That was extremely difficult. And then, after that, one of my best friends in this whole world that I'm pleased to work with, his name's Chad. He's one of the greatest men to ever walk the face of this earth. He had a heart attack at, I think we were 37 when it happened, or 38 years old, on a cruise ship in the Bahamas. So he's having a heart attack. He's stranded on a cruise ship and we can't get to him. So I'm adding that to my Rolodex. So all these experiences I'm learning, it's like the best way for me to process this trauma that I keep experiencing, because not only am I seeing bad things happen to strangers, I'm seeing bad things happen to people that I love.
Right.
Is I have to be aware that these things are supposed to hurt. And I absolutely cannot do this on my own. And for somebody in a pretty tight, an alpha type job where we like to consider ourselves tough and aggressive and all those things that come along with it, to break yourself down and make yourself less and say, I'm out. I'm done. I can't. I don't know what else to do for myself at this point, and to reach out to complete strangers and become very vulnerable with them about the things that you're not processing well was extremely difficult. But being able to go through the counseling process with that counseling service, I went through EMDR to help process some of the trauma that I'd been through. That was extremely helpful. But all of that would have been nothing if I would not have been able to come back home to my wife and say, I am so sorry for the person that I've allowed myself to become, because I failed you as your husband. And all this time, I'm thinking I'm maintaining. I'm keeping all this trauma stuff down somewhere. My exterior is still just as strong as it's always been. But I was fooling. I was lying to myself. I was lying to her, and I was lying to God, because I wasn't including him in all of this. I'm thinking like that old thought process, like I was telling you, if God leads me to it, he's going to get me through it. Well, all right. Well, you better ask him for some help.
Right.
Why, if he's going to get you through it, why aren't you including him in this process?
Come on.
That's
right.
So that's when I was like, man, I've got all these earthly resources that are making me healthy. Why am I not using the greatest resource of all to remind me of why I was created, why I may be experiencing these things, and to understand that no matter what I experience in life, if everything were to crash down around me, Christ is still Christ and my salvation is still strong.
Yeah.
And that aha moment as well, coupled with the breaking down of myself that I can't do this on my own, and knowing that no matter what I see and no matter what I experience and no matter how many times I fail, Christ died on the cross for me, knowing what my life was going to be like.
That's right.
So why am I trying to continue to be hard-headed and go down this path all by myself when he said, look, I loved you enough to sacrifice my son for you. Don't you think I love you enough to help you through all of this as well?
That's right. Come on.
I'm just like, that's when you just want to, you want to fall down on your face and go like, I'm giving this to you. I recognize that this is not for me to fix, that I've got to have help. And when I started,
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
I talked earlier about learning how to pray. When I learned that God was very aware of my struggles, and I just needed to talk to him about it, then all kinds of directions started to open up in my life. The things that I needed to do for myself became a lot more clear. The things that I needed to do for my kids, for my wife, for the guys I work with, all of that just opened up,
Yeah.
you know, and that was not going to happen no matter what my relationship with God was like, if I didn't start relying upon him the way that I was supposed to. You know, I can't say that I'm giving something to God, but then still try to do it my way.
That's right.
You know, it's one of the most hard-headed things that I've ever done. And I had to learn that lesson the hard way because I thought I was doing it right.
Right.
But man, I was not. I had failed at keeping myself mentally healthy, and all this time had this resource. You know, I had a loving father, a heavenly father that wanted me to feel better. Because I think about, I would like to imagine that the way that I feel for my children, which
Right.
is different than the way I feel towards any human being on this earth, those feelings are magnified in the way God feels about me.
That's right. Come on.
You know, because God created my children. I didn't create them. You know, God created me, and he didn't create me to spend a life suppressing trauma, suppressing my struggles. He gave me a support system and my salvation to be able to navigate these challenges here on earth. And I, as a human, was failing to do that.
Yeah.
So it's like, man, like, understand that you weren't created to be able to fix everything.
Yeah. Man, I'll tell you what, I've been doing this deep dive into the book of Hebrews over the last few months or so. You just did my personal studies, and I've learned something that I've never caught before. I don't know how many times I've read the book of Hebrews, you know, Hebrews chapter 2, Hebrews chapter 4, chapter 5. You know, it talks about Jesus coming to earth to understand what we went through, right? And there's something so special about that, right? Because sometimes we elevate Jesus to this point, and he should be, right? You know, I mean, he's God, right? That he's so untangible, right? He's so far away to where he loves us. He does all these things, but he can't really understand. But that's not what the book of Hebrews says. The book of Hebrews says that he sits on the right hand of the Father to be a mediator, right? Because when he came to understand our suffering. He came to understand our pain, right? He knows in every way that we suffer trauma, wounds, right? All of this stuff. He understands that, right? And there's something so surreal about that to me that helps me understand that, hey, I have an advocate that is sitting on the right hand of the Father that knows exactly the way that I feel, right? The wounds. Nobody's experienced trauma the way Jesus did. Nobody's experienced wounds the way Jesus did. The only person to ever in the history of the earth to ever feel the rejection of God is Jesus. That's it, right? He understands us, and he's up there. He's like, hey, Father, I know what he's going through. I understand his pain, right? That's life-changing to me, right? When you can grasp a hold of that not only do we have a Savior who saves our souls and helps us get into heaven, you're right, to spend eternity with him, but that same Savior understands my deepest wounds. He understands them because he experienced them, right? And man, that's something to grasp a hold of, right? You know, Charlie, this has been, man, and we could go on for hours. I know we could.
Yeah, I got a lot more in the tank. I'd love to, you know, I'd love to talk to you for quite a while.
Yeah, you know, and maybe we'll just have to do this again. And so, Charlie, I want to say thank you for your time. I want to say thank you for your leadership. and your willingness to serve Jesus and be the husband that He's called you to be the father that He's called you to be, right? Even struggling through even our own failures, right? It's not about always getting it right; it's about striving to be better, right? And so I want to give you just a moment to give some closing thoughts, right? If you have anything for the men that are listening to this podcast, that you would just want to share with them, I want to give you a few minutes to do so.
So some of the big things that have made such a difference in my life. It's first of all, as a man, a lot of people like to separate emotions from manliness.
Mm-hmm.
And that could not be further from the truth. I think the strongest men are the ones that are able to, buck the society's definition of masculinity and create your own godly masculinity.
Come on.
And that means standing in church with your kids. That means crying in front of your kids. That means praying with your kids and your wife. We're biblically called to lead our families and to be the head of the household. And if you spend your entire relationship with your kids and your spouse never showing any emotion, then you're not leading your household.
That's right. Come on.
Just like, man, you hit the nail on the head. Jesus felt those things and showed emotion. Jesus cried when He was on earth. He felt physical pain. My kids need to see me feel pain. They need to see me emotionally just broken down, and it's okay to have those conversations with your kids as a man. I have a 12 and 14-year-old daughter, and I look at them all the time and be like, hey, I'll apologize sometimes for the way that I handled a certain situation. And in building those relationships with your children, if you never show any emotion, and if you think that crying is a non-manly way to be, then your kids are going to see you as an emotionless figure, and they're not going to come to you and confide in you the things that they should. And I tell you, man, raising kids in today's society, you've got to equip them with the armor of God, and that absolutely includes letting them see you be vulnerable, and that there's nothing in the world wrong with that. And I'll leave you with one last thing, man. Find somebody to chase. Find those godly men in your life. And if you don't have somebody outside of your familial system that you can look to, that not only you can emulate, but you can trust to give you that feedback that says, hey man, you're getting out of whack. Something's not right here. You establish those relationships and that mentorship to where they can look you in the eye and say, hey man, you're straying. You're not being kept in check right now, and you're not doing the things that you need to do. Those kinds of people in your life are invaluable. If you don't have the right mentorship, if you don't have the right Christian men that you're surrounding yourself with, then you're going to become whatever other things you're surrounding yourself with instead of that. So, be vulnerable in front of your kids and find those people to chase that you want to emulate, people that you have respect for that and they don't have it going on. They don't have everything figured out. They're just as fallible as we are. But those examples in your life are something that you're not going to make it out without somebody setting that example for you.
Amen. Man, that's a good way to end it. Good job, Charlie. That's excellent. And so, man, again, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. We're going to have to do this again. And I appreciate your time. I appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate you sharing to the men of the podcast. And so, guys, those of you who are listening, man, please, if you're struggling with these things, please take heed to what Charlie had said. Please, find those men, just like he said, be vulnerable before the Lord, become the leader that God has called you to be. Know that know that the Lord loves you. He is for you. He wants to see you succeed. And we love you, and we're here for you. If you have any questions, email us, realmen@palaceofpraise.com. You can find us on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all that good jazz. Reach out to us. We'd love to answer any questions. If you don't have anybody in your corner, you don't feel like you have anybody in your corner, please reach out to us. We would love to be those people for you. And as always, I want to end in a prayer. Holy Spirit, teach us to be leaders of our homes, of our communities, and of our churches, and teach us to be godly, courageous men. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.